So you want to know more about the Founding Fathers. As a professor of American history who frequently teaches courses on both the American Revolution and just the early American period in general, I am most frequently asked about reading recommendations for knowing more about the Founding Fathers. This has been increasingly the case as America approaches its 250th anniversary of the Revolution, which is going to be in 2026. It's also become a controversial topic as Donald Trump's White House is ordering educators to teach what he calls a patriotic history, something I've already done a video on in the past. But in this video, I thought I'd respond to that frequently asked question of what books to read about the Founding Fathers to help you in your voyage in learning more about the founding. But I'm going to do a twist on that topic. Rather than doing old-fashioned biographies on these founding figures, and believe me, there's still lots of those. Historians haven't moved away from studying the Founding Fathers. They still get a disproportionate amount of attention in the academy. But what historians have done more of recently is capturing the world around those figures. And that includes individuals who would be in the room with those politicians and leaders, but whose voices were rarely heard. So in this video, I'm going to give you my favorite recommended readings related to 4 founding fathers: George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and John Adams. And in fact, I'm going to give you 2 books for each of those. One that talks about the people around those figures, and then another that talks about those figures themselves, but in a way that you might not expect. I hope this video will offer you a launching pad into your own research so you can join in this cacophonous dispute over the founding as we approach the 250th anniversary next year. Let's dig in. Actually, one last thing before I get started, I apologize, but this is your nagging reminder that if you haven't yet, please subscribe to this channel, like the video, and share it with others if you enjoyed. I'm trying to build this channel as a vehicle to bridge the academic and general public on these topics in history, because that discourse is oh so needed now. All right, with that out of the way, now let's dig in. So let's start with George Washington, the founding father among the founding fathers. And the fact that he's identified in Washington, D.C. with a large granite monument is quite apropos, because he's seen as immovable, stately, and pristine, someone who you don't expect to have rough edges. He's very polished. That was by design. In fact, he and those around him cultivated a sense of this perfect godlike man walking around humans. But you know who might take issue with that idea? Ona Judge. The first book I'm recommending is by Erica Dunbar. It's titled Never Caught: The Washingtons' Relentless Pursuit of Their Runaway Slave, Ona Judge. Ona Judge was an enslaved woman who lived on the Washington plantation. She was the daughter of an enslaved woman and a man who worked on the property. And George Washington was so attached to slavery, and he was reliant on the enslaved labor, that when he moved to New York City and then Philadelphia as the newly elected president, he took several enslaved people with him, including Ona Judge. But there was a problem. Especially in Pennsylvania, they had liberty laws that were meant to make sure that slavery did not appear on their soil. So they had laws in place that if you were a Southerner traveling into Pennsylvania and you take an enslaved person with you, if that enslaved person remains on Pennsylvania soil for more than 6 months, they are freed. That is part of an emancipation process that was embedded in the emancipation laws introduced in Pennsylvania. George Washington, though, was so adamant that he wanted the enslaved laborers around him, because heaven forbid he do work on his own or hire people, that he set up a rotating system where he would bring out enslaved laborers for 5.5 months at a time, and then send them back to Virginia so their clock can start again, and then bring them back. That's how dedicated he was to the slave practice. And Ona Judge was in this very vulnerable position. He was actually enslaved to Martha Washington, George Washington's wife, but was part of the entire Washington family. And when she heard rumors that she was going to be given as a marriage present to Martha Washington's granddaughter, who was marrying another enslaver, she decided to flee. She wanted the promises of freedom. She was aware of what some northern states were offering. She was likely embedded within the free black population in Philadelphia due to her working conditions, and so she ran away while George Washington was present, which placed Washington in a bind. On the one hand, he wanted his property back. He wanted to send people out to capture the fugitive. On the other, he recognized the tense politics involved in such an initiative, so he tried to do it secretly, and in the end, unsuccessfully, because Ona Judge lived the rest of her life free in the northern states. This story is important because it shows how slavery was in the room with George Washington everywhere he went. It shows how committed he was to the practice to try to work around Pennsylvania's emancipation laws, and it showed that he wanted to get back his property even though he knew it would be bad PR. All right, my second book recommendation for George Washington is T.H. Bring's George Washington's Journey, The President Forges a New Nation. I like this book. It focuses on a nationwide tour that George Washington took as president, in which he recognized that among the new states that created America, there was very little things that tied the nation together, and he wanted to fix that. And he realized that devotion to him was one form of patriotism. And so he went out to try to bind the nation together through his mere presence. And in doing so, he cultivated the very Washington myth that lives to today of the founding father above all the founding fathers. It's told with lively prose and is very revealing, and it talks about how dedicated Washington was to the intricate detail, including the presence of slaves, and it gives you a certain perspective of the man that you might not get elsewhere. Maybe the most beloved of the founding fathers is Benjamin Franklin, the dude who caught lightning in a bottle, the scientific experiment that changed America's reputation and then became a diplomat to be able to join America with these other foreign nations, the subject of Apple TV's Franklin television show last year that I actually really enjoyed. For my book recommendation related to Ben Franklin, though, and focusing on people around him, I strongly recommend Jill Lepore's The Book of Ages, The Life and Opinions of Jane Franklin. Now, Jane Franklin and Benjamin Franklin were brother and sister. They were two of the youngest siblings in a large family born in Boston. They were known as Benny and Jenny. The problem, however, is that their lives were dictated at birth, because Benjamin Franklin, as a man, was able to gain a lot of opportunities that his sister, Jane, was not. They were both kind of stuck in their situations as teenagers. Benjamin Franklin, as an indentured servant, he ran away. He broke those bonds to Philadelphia and eventually became successful. Jane Franklin was never given that opportunity. Similarly, as teenagers, both Benny and Jenny had illegitimate children. Benjamin Franklin, however, was able to transcend that crisis and later marry someone else, and he was not hampered by having an illegitimate child. However, Jane Franklin, because she got pregnant, she had to marry the man who impregnated her, which turned out to be a bad marriage, but that was necessary, and she was stuck for the remainder of her life. That unplanned pregnancy dictated the course of the rest of her days, whereas for Benjamin Franklin, it did not. And then later on, Benjamin Franklin, of course, is able to travel the world, experiment in science, and become a national and international celebrity. Jane pled with Ben to send her works because she felt constantly underused. It showed the limits that were placed. This story is important because it shows how gender framed your expectations and experiences. It also emphasizes the importance of birth control, something, a topic that remains crucial in understanding American history for a variety of reasons. And if you want something more focused on Benjamin Franklin, I strongly recommend David Wallstreicher's Runaway America, Benjamin Franklin's Slavery and the American Revolution, which places Franklin's life at the heart, at its heart, he talks about slavery. We often think about Benjamin Franklin as being anti-slavery because one of the last things he does before he dies is he adds his name to a petition to abolish slavery. But that papers over the fact that for a majority of his life, He was pro-slavery. He enslaved someone himself, and his entire business practice was based on slavery, despite the fact that he himself broke the bonds of indentured servitude, but they did not recognize the rights of others to do so. So it offers a more cynical view of Franklin that really fleshes him out as a three-dimension character. Then there's Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence and the philosopher of liberty, whose life was also inextricably connected to slavery. How could the author who wrote "All mankind are created equal" enslave hundreds of people on his own property? And the book that captures that dynamic better than any other is the award-winning The Hemingses of Monticello, An American Family by Annette Gordon Reed. This book won the National Book Award as well as tons of other national awards, and it teases out the lives of the enslaved Hemings family who lived on the Monticello plantation. In fact, they were the cherished family, they and some others above the other enslaved. So there were gradations within the enslaved. You get James Hemings, who was Thomas Jefferson's personal chef. But most importantly, you get Sally Hemings, who as a young girl was impregnated by Thomas Jefferson. And because a woman who, or in this case, a young girl who is enslaved by a man, you can't ever really say that they give consent to that type of relationship. So she ends up bearing five children to Thomas Jefferson in a case that is best described as rape. Because, again, she does not have the ability to say no. She cannot give consent. Scholars debate that type of terminology and usage, but this story is important because it fleshes out this story of those enslaved who are typically forgotten in our narratives of the founding. And it demonstrates the paradoxes at the heart of the Revolutionary era. And it's told in a way, it's a reverse. It's a photographic narrative, a negative, to where Annette Gordon Reed, an award-winning historian, one of the best historians we have out there, is able to tease out these lives with very few sources by asking questions that historians in the past have ignored. If you want a more biographical approach on Jefferson, I'm going to turn again to Annette Gordon Reed, one of our great historians, who co-authored with Peter Onuf The Most Blessed of Patriarchs, Thomas Jefferson and the Empire of Imagination. This is a biography of Jefferson that focuses on the three places that Thomas Jefferson lived: his Monticello plantation, his time in Paris, and then his time in Washington, D.C. as president. It deals with his political ideas, his philosophical theories, and grounds them in time and place within the people who surrounded him. I strongly recommend it. And for the final figure, let's talk about John Adams, the political thinker, pragmatist, and moral compass, because he was the founding father who wasn't an enslaver. But the story is much more complicated. For a book that talks about the people around John Adams, I recommend Woody Holton's Abigail Adams, which is a biography of Abigail Adams, John Adams' wife. And it's really a dual history of the Adams family. And it dissects in some ways how they were revolutionary for their time, but also how they were conservative. Abigail Adams was able to own property, make decisions, but when she appealed for John Adams to, quote unquote, remember the ladies at the time of the Constitution drafting, he doesn't. Or I guess that was the time of the Declaration of Independence, but they forget the Constitution as well. So it shows the limits of their revolutionary ideas and demonstrates that John Adams did not exist in a vacuum. Now, if you want a much more biographical approach of John Adams, one that focuses on his time as president, I strongly recommend the brand new Making the Presidency, John Adams and the Precedents That Forged the Republic by Lindsay Stravinsky. This talks about his 4 years in office and the national disputes that roiled the country, whether it be over foreign intrigue with France, internal dissent, the creation of the Alien and Sedition Acts. John Adams does not come out as, a perfect individual, but a man of his time, swept up in the political currents with lessons that I think are quite relevant for today. So there you have it. Those are my book recommendations. Consider them your own. Consider them your own homework. There are tons of other books I could recommend. These are just a few that I really like to suggest to others that gives you a better perspective, not just of the founding fathers, these framers, but also the people that surround them and made up their world. Again, if you haven't yet, please subscribe to this channel, like the video, share it if there are others who you think might enjoy it. Check out the other videos I have, including my video on why patriotic education is bad and why this type of history that provides a three-dimensional perspective of our historical figures, including those who founded the nation, is so important. Good history has never been more significant for today because it contains lessons that, unfortunately, we still need to learn.